There's a moment when everything shifts. You're standing in a room full of people who think they understand power, watching them tear each other apart with the desperate hunger of those who mistake noise for strength. They gesture wildly, voices rising, each word a confession of their weakness. And you say nothing. You don't even smile. You simply exist in that space like gravity itself. Inevitable, silent, undeniable. This is not about being cold. This is about being nuclear. The ancient masters understood something that modern power seekers have forgotten in their rush to dominate. True authority doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon, he didn't send press releases. When tigers hunt, they don't roar first. The most devastating force in any room is the one that others cannot read, cannot predict, cannot manipulate through their own emotional projections. You see, everyone is playing checkers, moving their pieces frantically across the board, believing that activity equals progress. But you're playing chess on a board they can't even see. While they exhaust themselves in theatrical displays of competence, you're mapping the psychology of every player, cataloging their fears, their desperate needs for validation, their pathological inability to sit with uncertainty. Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved, but he buried the more profound truth. It is better to be unknowable than either. Fear requires maintenance. Love demands performance. But the unknowable, that generates its own energy. People will create entire mythologies around your silence, projecting their deepest anxieties onto your calm. They will defeat themselves trying to solve the puzzle of your intentions. Here's exactly how this works in practice. Picture this. You're in a meeting. Someone launches what they think is a devastating critique of your work. The room goes quiet. Everyone's eyes turn to you, waiting for the defensive explosion, the counterattack, the justification that weakness always provides. Instead, you do nothing. You don't lean forward, you don't lean back, your breathing doesn't change. You look at them with the same expression you'd wear while reading a mildly interesting newspaper article. Then, after exactly 3 seconds, count them, 3 full seconds, you turn your attention to someone else and say, "What's your take on the Q3 projections?" Watch what happens. The attacker sits there, their words hanging in the air like smoke, unremarked upon, unworthy of response. The room doesn't know what to do with this. They expected drama. They got physics instead. The person who spoke against you has just discovered that their best ammunition bounced off you without leaving a mark. More devastating, they realize they've revealed their strategy while you've revealed nothing. But this is just the surface level. Let's go deeper. The profound truth is that most people are drowning in their own psychology. They wake up every morning in a state of quiet desperation, needing the world to confirm their worth, validate their intelligence, acknowledge their existence. This need makes them predictable, and predictability in the hands of someone who understands patience becomes a weapon of surgical precision. Consider social media, that modern coliseum where people perform their insecurities for an audience of strangers. Someone posts an attack on you, tags you, expects you to engage in digital combat for the entertainment of the masses. The conventional response is to defend, to explain, to justify. This is exactly what they want. Your reaction becomes their validation. Here's what you do instead. Nothing. Not immediately. You let the post exist in its own little corner of digital space. Let their followers see it. Let them wait for your response. Day 1 passes. Day 2. By day 3, something interesting happens. The energy around their attack begins to dissipate. Their followers start to wonder why you haven't responded. Is it because you're above such things? Because you don't care? Because you're planning something? The narrative shifts from their attack to your absence. Or, when you finally do respond, if you respond at all, it's not to them. It's a post about something completely unrelated. A photo of your breakfast, a philosophical quote, Something that demonstrates your attention is elsewhere, that their existence barely registered on your radar. This is not indifference. This is strategic irrelevance. The attacker discovers they've expended emotional energy into a void. Their friends start to see them as someone who attacks ghosts. And you've demonstrated something far more powerful than wit or intellect. You've shown that you exist in a reality where their opinion of you has no impact on your actual existence. But let's escalate this. Professional environments require more sophisticated approaches. You're in a conference room. A colleague attempts to undermine you in front of senior leadership. They've prepared. They have slides. They have data that, taken out of context, makes you look incompetent. The old you might have prepared counterslides, defensive statistics, a presentation to restore your reputation. The new you does something different. You listen to their entire presentation with the attention of someone genuinely interested in understanding their perspective. You nod occasionally. You take notes. When they finish, you say, "Thank you for putting this together. This clearly took a lot of work." Then you pause. 2 beats. I'd like to suggest we table this for now and reconvene once we have more complete data. What just happened? You didn't defend against their attack. You didn't even acknowledge it as an attack. You treated it as incomplete information, worthy of consideration but not yet ready for decision-making. You've repositioned yourself as the mature voice of prudence, while they appear eager to rush to judgment. The real genius unfolds in the following days. You begin having casual conversations with various team members, not about the presentation, about their experiences working on similar projects, about challenges they've faced, about incomplete data sets they've encountered. You're not building a case against your colleague. You're allowing others to build understanding of context. By the time you reconvene, the room's perspective has shifted. People have had time to think. They've had conversations. They've realized that quick judgments based on partial information might not serve the organization well. When you present your complete analysis, it doesn't look like a response to an attack. It looks like the natural progression of thoughtful investigation. Your colleague hasn't just lost this battle. They've been redefined as someone who jumps to conclusions, who politicizes professional discussions, who can't be trusted with complex analysis. And you're the person who brings calm, thorough thinking to emotional situations. The romantic realm offers perhaps the most delicate applications of these principles. Someone you care about is angry with you. They're demanding explanations, accountability, dramatic gestures of apology. Every instinct screams to provide what they're asking for, to soothe their distress, to fix the immediate problem. But pause. Consider what's really happening. Their anger, while genuine, is also a test, not a conscious test, but a psychological one. They're asking, are you someone who will collapse under pressure? Are you someone whose reality can be destabilized by my emotional state? Are you solid enough to remain yourself when I'm not myself? This doesn't mean being cruel or dismissive. It means being present without being reactive. You listen to their concerns with genuine attention. You acknowledge their feelings without accepting responsibility for managing them. You might say something like, I can see this is really important to you. Help me understand what would be most useful right now. Notice what you haven't done. You haven't apologized for things you didn't do. You haven't promised to change behaviors that weren't problematic. You haven't accepted the frame that their emotional state is your responsibility to fix. Instead, you've created space for them to examine what they actually need rather than what they think they want. This approach transforms the entire dynamic. Instead of a power struggle where one person demands and the other submits, you've created a collaborative exploration of the underlying issue. More importantly, you've demonstrated that you can remain stable and caring even when they cannot. This doesn't diminish their autonomy. It provides them with something to orient toward when their own emotional compass is spinning. The people who master this understand something crucial. Other people's emotional emergencies are not your spiritual crises. You can care deeply about someone's well-being without making their psychological state the center of your existence. This boundary isn't selfish. It's essential for creating relationships where both people can maintain their individual integrity while building something together. But here's where it transcends the merely tactical and becomes genuinely philosophical. What we're really discussing is the difference between reaction and response. Reaction is chemical, it's automatic. It's driven by the primitive parts of your brain that kept your ancestors alive on the savannah, but serve you poorly in conference rooms and coffee shops. Response is conscious, it's chosen. It emerges from the part of you that can observe your own thoughts and emotions without being enslaved by them. The person who masters strategic patience has developed what philosophers call the observing self, the part of consciousness that can watch your own mental processes without being swept away by them. When someone attacks you, part of you notices the attack, another part notices your emotional response to the attack, and a third part observes the whole system with curious detachment. This isn't dissociation, this isn't emotional numbing. This is integration at the highest level. You feel everything, but you're not controlled by anything. You understand that emotions are information, not instructions. Your anger tells you something important is happening, but it doesn't tell you what to do about it. Your fear alerts you to potential threat, but it doesn't dictate your response to that threat. Machiavelli understood this when he wrote that princes must learn to be both the lion and the fox, to have both strength and cunning. But he was pointing towards something even more sophisticated. The leader who transcends the need to choose between strength and cunning because they've developed the capacity to respond appropriately to whatever the situation demands. This is why strategic silence is so devastatingly effective. It's not passive, it's the most active thing possible. While others are reacting unconsciously to stimuli, you're consciously choosing your response based on your assessment of what the situation actually requires. Let's examine a particularly sophisticated example. You're at a dinner party. Someone begins telling a story that portrays you in an unflattering light. It's not entirely false, but it's incomplete, taken out of context, designed to diminish you in the eyes of others present. The table grows uncomfortable. Everyone is watching to see how you'll handle this. The amateur defends immediately, correcting the narrative, explaining the missing context, making the dinner party into a courtroom where they're representing themselves. The professional might make a joke, deflecting with humor, showing they're not bothered, but also engaging with the frame that this requires a response. The master does something different. They listen to the entire story with genuine interest, as if hearing it for the first time. They might even ask clarifying questions, helping the storyteller tell their version more completely. When the story ends, they pause for a moment, then shift the conversation to someone else entirely. Sarah, didn't you have something similar happen when you were working in Portland? What's happened here is extraordinary. You've refused to accept the premise that you need to defend yourself. You've treated the story as information about the storyteller's perspective rather than an attack requiring response. You've demonstrated that you're secure enough in your own reality that someone else's version doesn't threaten you. And you've redirected the social energy towards something more constructive. The storyteller is left in an interesting position. Their attack didn't land because there was nothing solid for it to impact. They're now the person who told an unflattering story about someone who responded with curiosity rather than defensiveness. The other guests don't know quite what to make of this, but they're more likely to admire your composure than to join in criticism of someone who handled their critic so gracefully. But the real power move happens later. Weeks later, you run into someone who was at that dinner. They mention how impressed they were with how you handled that situation. You look genuinely puzzled for a moment, then say, "Oh, you mean when David was telling that story about the Portland project? I thought that was interesting. He had a completely different perspective on how things went." You've done something profound here. You've demonstrated that the incident was so insignificant to you that you barely remember it as something that happened to you. It was just an interesting difference of perspective. This isn't denial or minimization. This is someone who is so secure in their own sense of self that other people's opinions of them don't register as threats requiring defensive responses. The psychological impact of this cannot be overstated. You've shown that you exist in a reality where attacks bounce off you, not because you're defended, but because you're fundamentally unattackable. You're not playing the same game as people who need to defend their reputation, justify their choices, or prove their worth to others. This brings us to a crucial paradox. The less you need power, the more power you have. People who desperately need to be seen as powerful are obvious in their neediness. They overcompensate, they dominate conversations, they name drop and credentials drop and achievement drop until everyone in the room is exhausted by their insecurity masquerading as confidence. They're like people dying of thirst, talking constantly about how much water they have. But someone who is genuinely powerful doesn't need to demonstrate it, because they're not trying to convince anyone of anything. They're simply being themselves, and their authentic presence either resonates with others or it doesn't. They're not attached to the outcome because they're not deriving their sense of self-worth from other people's recognition of their capabilities. This detachment, and it must be genuine detachment, not performed indifference, creates a gravitational field. People are drawn to those who don't need them. It's counterintuitive but undeniable. The person at the party who's not trying to impress anyone often ends up being the most impressive person there. Here's how this plays out in the digital age, where everyone is performing their life for an audience of semi-strangers. Most people post constantly, seeking validation through likes and comments and shares. They craft their online presence to project success, happiness, wisdom, humor, whatever they think will generate the approval they crave. Their social media becomes a needy broadcast of their psychological deficiencies. The strategically powerful person uses social media like a surgeon uses a scalpel, precisely, rarely, and only when it serves a specific purpose. They might go days or weeks without posting anything. When they do post, it's not because they need validation. It's because they have something genuinely worth sharing. This creates scarcity around their attention and communication. People begin to notice when they do engage. Their occasional posts carry more weight than the constant chatter of people who treat social media like a verbal tick. When they comment on someone else's post, that comment means something because it's rare. But more importantly, they're not using social media to construct an identity. They're using it to share fragments of an identity that exists independently of the platform. They don't need Instagram to tell them they're interesting. They don't need Facebook to confirm their social connections. They don't need Twitter to validate their thoughts. This distinction is crucial. Most people are unconsciously outsourcing their self-worth to algorithms and strangers. The powerful person keeps their psychological center of gravity within themselves. They might enjoy social media, but they don't depend on it for their sense of who they are. When someone attacks them online, they apply the same principles we've discussed. Often, they simply don't respond at all. Not because they didn't see the attack, but because responding would validate the attacker's belief that their opinion matters enough to warrant a response. If they do respond, it's never defensive. It might be a simple "I see it differently," followed by silence, or they might ask a genuinely curious question: what led you to that conclusion? This forces the attacker to examine their own reasoning rather than simply throwing emotional grenades. The most sophisticated response is often to engage with the underlying concern while ignoring the attack itself. If someone posts, "This person has no idea what they're talking about regarding economics," a powerful response might be, "Economic theory is fascinating because there are so many schools of thought that reach different conclusions from the same data. What's your take on the Chicago school approach to this issue?" You've acknowledged that there's a conversation to be had about economics without accepting the premise that you're ignorant. You've redirected towards substantive discussion rather than personal attack. You've demonstrated intellectual curiosity rather than defensiveness. And you've put the attacker in a position where they either need to engage substantively or reveal that they were more interested in attacking than in actually discussing economics. This approach works because it operates from a fundamentally different assumption about what online interaction is for. Most people treat it as a battleground where they need to defend their territory and attack their enemies. The powerful person treats it as a medium for occasional meaningful exchange with people who are genuinely interested in ideas rather than conflict. As we move deeper into these concepts, it becomes clear that what we're really discussing is not manipulation, but mastery. Mastery of yourself first, and then mastery of your response to a world that is often chaotic, reactive, and unconscious. The person who can remain calm while others panic, who can think clearly while others are overwhelmed by emotion, who can respond thoughtfully while others are reacting automatically, this person naturally becomes a center of gravity in their environment. Not because they're trying to control others, but because they've learned to control themselves. This is why Machiavelli emphasized the importance of appearing virtuous even when acting pragmatically. It's not about deception, it's about understanding that true effectiveness comes from operating at a higher level of consciousness than those around you. When you can see the game that others are unconsciously playing, you can choose whether to play it or to play a different game entirely. The different game is this. Instead of trying to win every battle, you position yourself to be essential to the resolution of conflicts. Instead of trying to be the smartest person in every room, you become the person that smart people turn to when they need clarity. Instead of trying to dominate every conversation, you become the person whose occasional contributions redirect the entire discussion. This requires a fundamental shift in how you understand your own power. Power is not something you take from others. It's something you generate through your own competence, clarity, and presence. When you understand this, you stop seeing other people as competitors for a limited resource and start seeing them as potential collaborators in creating something larger than any individual could achieve alone. But this doesn't mean being naive about human nature or the reality of competition and conflict. It means operating from a position of strength that is genuinely secure rather than defensively constructed. Let's examine what this looks like in a hostile environment where collaboration is not possible and someone is genuinely trying to destroy your reputation or position. The scenario: you're being publicly accused of professional misconduct. The accusations are false, but they're being made by someone with credibility, and they're gaining traction. The conventional response is to mount an immediate defense, provide evidence of your innocence, and attack the credibility of your accuser. This approach has several problems. First, it makes you look defensive, which often creates the impression that you have something to hide. Second, it keeps the story alive by generating ongoing conflict. Third, it requires you to play the game on your accuser's terms, using their framework for what needs to be proven or disproven. The strategic approach is different. First, you acknowledge the seriousness of the accusations publicly, but briefly. I understand these are serious allegations. I take them seriously, and I'm confident that a thorough examination of the facts will provide clarity for everyone involved. Then you do something unexpected. You request a formal investigation by the most rigorous, impartial authority available. You don't just proclaim your innocence, you actively invite scrutiny. This accomplishes several things simultaneously. It demonstrates confidence in your position. It shows respect for proper process rather than trial by public opinion. And it forces your accuser to engage with actual evidence rather than narrative. While the investigation proceeds, you don't defend yourself publicly. You don't issue statements. You don't try to control the narrative. You continue doing your work at the highest level possible, letting your competence speak for itself. This approach requires genuine innocence, of course, but assuming that's the case, it transforms the entire dynamic. Your accuser is now in the position of having their claims scrutinized by people whose job it is to evaluate evidence rather than to be swayed by emotional appeals. You've positioned yourself as someone who trusts in truth and process rather than someone who needs to win a public relations battle. When the investigation clears you, you don't gloat. You don't attack your accuser. You issue a simple statement. I'm grateful for the thorough investigation and pleased that we now have clarity on these matters. I look forward to moving forward with the important work we're all here to do. What's happened here is that you've demonstrated something powerful about your character. You've shown that you can remain composed under pressure, that you trust in truth over narrative, and that you're more interested in resolution than in revenge. These are the qualities that people want in leaders, partners, and colleagues. Your accuser, meanwhile, has revealed something about themselves. They've shown that they're willing to make serious accusations without sufficient evidence. They've demonstrated that they prefer public conflict to proper process. They've positioned themselves as someone who shoots first and asks questions later. Even if some people initially believed the accusations, your response has created doubt about your accuser's judgment and motives. More importantly, you've emerged from the conflict with your integrity, not just intact, but enhanced. This is the profound difference between defending your reputation and demonstrating your character. Reputation is what other people think of you. Character is who you actually are. When you focus on maintaining your character, your reputation tends to take care of itself. When you focus on defending your reputation, you often compromise your character in the process. The person who understands strategic patience operates from character rather than reputation. They know that momentary public opinion is less important than long-term demonstrated competence. They are willing to endure temporary misunderstanding in service of maintaining their integrity. This long-term perspective is perhaps the most crucial element of genuine power. Most people are playing for quarterly results. They want immediate validation, quick wins, rapid advancement. This short-term thinking makes them vulnerable to manipulation by anyone who's willing to sacrifice immediate gratification for strategic positioning. The truly powerful person is playing a longer game. They're building capabilities, relationships, and credibility that will compound over time. They understand that influence is like compound interest. It accelerates as it accumulates, but only if you don't withdraw from the account too frequently. This is why they can afford to lose individual battles. They're not trying to win every encounter. They're trying to position themselves to be indispensable when the important decisions are made. When the crisis hits and organizations need someone who can think clearly under pressure, they want to be the obvious choice. When people need advice on complex problems, they want to be the person others turn to naturally. Building this kind of long-term influence requires consistent demonstration of several key qualities: competence, reliability, and wisdom. Competence means you can actually do what you say you can do. Reliability means you do it consistently, even when it's difficult or inconvenient. Wisdom means you understand not just how to solve problems, but which problems are worth solving. These qualities cannot be faked over time. You either develop them or you don't. And the process of developing them changes you in ways that make traditional power games seem crude and unnecessary. When you know you're genuinely competent, you don't need to prove it in every interaction. When you're truly reliable, you don't need to make promises because your track record speaks for itself. When you've developed wisdom, you understand that most conflicts are distractions from more important work. This is the ultimate paradox of strategic patience. The less you need to use it, the more effective it becomes. When you've developed genuine strength, you rarely need to demonstrate it. When you have real options, you don't need to threaten people with them. When you possess actual power, you can afford to be generous because your position is secure. The person who has reached this level operates from what we might call enlightened pragmatism. They understand human nature without being cynical about it. They can navigate political realities without becoming political themselves. They can work within systems without being corrupted by them. This doesn't mean they're naive or passive. When action is required, they act decisively. When confrontation is necessary, they engage fully. But they choose their battles based on strategic importance rather than emotional reaction. They fight when fighting serves their larger purposes, not when fighting would simply make them feel better. As we reach the culmination of these ideas, it becomes clear that what we've been discussing is not just a collection of tactics, but a comprehensive philosophy of personal power. This philosophy rests on several foundational principles. First, that your internal state determines your external options. If you're reactive, desperate, or needy, your choices are limited to whatever provides immediate relief from those feelings. If you're calm, patient, and secure, you can choose from a much wider range of responses based on what actually serves your interests. Second, that genuine power comes from competence, not dominance. The person who can actually solve problems will always be more valuable than the person who can simply create them. The person who can build will always be more powerful than the person who can only destroy. Third, that influence is earned through demonstration, not declaration. You cannot convince people that you're powerful by telling them you're powerful. You can only show them by consistently making good decisions, solving difficult problems, and remaining stable when others cannot. Fourth, that patience is not passive but the most active stance possible. While others are burning energy on immediate reactions, you're accumulating options and advantages that will serve you when it matters most. Fifth, that the highest form of power is the ability to choose your own response to any situation. Freedom is not the absence of constraints, but the capacity to act according to your own principles, regardless of external pressure. When you understand these principles not just intellectually, but viscerally, you begin to move through the world differently. You stop seeing other people as threats to be defended against or resources to be exploited. You start seeing them as complex beings with their own motivations, fears, and aspirations that you can work with or around as circumstances require. You stop needing every interaction to confirm your worth or validate your choices. You become curious about others rather than competitive with them. You ask better questions because you're not trying to prove anything. You listen more carefully because you're not planning your rebuttal. This shift in orientation changes everything. When you're not trying to win social interactions, you often end up being the most respected person in the room. When you're not trying to prove your intelligence, people often perceive you as the wisest person present. When you're not trying to control outcomes, you often have the most influence on what actually happens. This is the deepest teaching of strategic patience. It's not about manipulating others, but about mastering yourself. It's not about getting what you want through cleverness, but about becoming the kind of person who naturally attracts what serves their highest good. The person who embodies these principles doesn't need to read the room because they are the room. They don't need to play politics because they transcend politics. They don't need to manage their reputation because their character speaks louder than any story others might tell about them. When conflicts arise, they don't ask, "How do I win this?" They ask, "What does this situation require?" When opportunities appear, they don't ask, "How do I grab this?" They ask, "Is this aligned with where I'm heading?" When people attack them, they don't ask, "How do I defend myself?" They ask, "What is this person really trying to tell me about what they need?" Sometimes the answer is that the person needs to attack someone to feel better about themselves, in which case the response is strategic irrelevance. Sometimes the answer is that the person has a legitimate concern that they're expressing poorly, in which case the response is genuine engagement with the underlying issue. This level of discernment is only possible when you're operating from a place of genuine security. When you know who you are and where you're going, other people's opinions of you become information rather than instructions. You can consider their perspectives without being controlled by them. The final level of mastery is when this approach becomes so natural that you're not consciously applying techniques anymore. You're simply being yourself, and your authentic self happens to embody the principles we've been exploring. You don't choose strategic patience as a tactic. You are strategically patient because you've internalized the understanding that this is how conscious beings operate in an unconscious world. At this point, the very idea of power games becomes obsolete. You're not trying to have power over others because you've achieved something more valuable, complete power over yourself. You don't need to control external circumstances because you've developed the capacity to respond appropriately to whatever circumstances arise. This is the ultimate victory, not over others, but over the unconscious patterns that once controlled your responses. You've become someone who cannot be manipulated because you're no longer driven by the needs that make manipulation possible. You cannot be threatened because your security comes from within. You cannot be defeated because you're not playing a game where defeat is possible. You've transcended the need for enemies because you understand that your only real opponent was ever the reactive, unconscious version of yourself. And in conquering that opponent, you've gained something that no external victory could provide: the unshakable peace of someone who knows they can handle whatever comes next. This is not the end of conflict or challenge in your life. If anything, you'll probably face greater challenges as you take on larger responsibilities and more complex problems. But you'll face them as someone who has developed the capacity to remain yourself regardless of external pressure. And that capacity, the ability to be fully yourself in any situation, is the true source of all lasting power. Everything else is just technique.